5 scores! Rick Vaughn.
We decided to get ourselves back in the game again with our podcast.
Rick Vaughn, Gary Neville.
Probably the craziest story that you're ever going to hear about hockey.
We're going to be coming back to you on a regular basis.
You are listening to Squid and the Ultimate Leafs Fan.
Hello, Canada and hockey fans of the United States and Newfoundland, and an extra big hello to Canadian servicemen overseas.
Episode 113 of the Squid and Ultimate Leaf Fan Show. I'm Mike Wilson, the Ultimate Leafs Fan. Joining me as always, my winger, Ricky Squid Vibes. Squid, how you keeping? Still jet lagged from Sweden?
Yeah. Yeah, I had a good sleep last night, but I'm still kind of a little bit out of it after traveling as much as we did. But I think it'll only be another day, and I think I'll be fine.
That's good to hear. So you got your A game today because you better be on your toes today with our guest. We have quite a character, great guy, very interesting career he's had so far. I don't know where to begin except saying he was taken 8th overall by Montreal Canadiens in 1995 amateur draft, enjoyed an 8-year pro career. He's an Allen Cup finalist, has a university degree, wrote 2 books. One I'm going to read, hopefully both of them, Tales of a First Round Nothing. He's an accomplished actor, hosts Tales with Terry Ryan podcast. He does another one for a hockey podcast. He was a stand-up comic. I mean, my God, he competed internationally in ball hockey. I mean, I think we pumped his tires long enough. Here we go. Welcome, Terry Ryan. Terry, first off, thanks for joining us, and how you doing? I'm glad you could find an hour to talk to us.
Oh, thanks a lot for having me. Honestly, it's a real honor to be here, and it as was it a couple of weeks ago to play with Rick in the little mini tour of Newfoundland we got going. I'm a big hockey fan in general, and I know you guys have an awesome podcast, and Rick Vive is part of hockey history in more ways than one, so it's an honor to be here.
Oh, well, thank you, Terry.
Hey, no sweat, man. Hey, I was born in 1977. You were doing what you were doing, and I was they say you form your sports and hockey, in my case, heroes, between like 5 and 12, right? And you were in your prime then, so I remember a lot. And plus, back then, there wasn't as many options. It was simple. Throw on Hockey Night in Canada, and whoever's playing, you go from there. And It seems now that we know less about a lot more, and I preferred it the way I grew up, but I guess everybody would say that.
Well, that's good, and we've got so much we want to get through with you, Terry. But I guess best way to go about it is let's just go back to the beginning. I mean, you're born in St. John's, Newfoundland. I played with a guy from there. Your dad played in the OHA, had a stint in the WHA. Yeah. Is that how you took to the game of hockey as a kid?
It is. Dad came from, I don't mind saying it for lack of a better word, a poor family. He's 5 brothers and sisters, and his dad was a waiter, and his mom didn't work. So he was from Grand Falls, Newfoundland. I don't think growing up he ever really expected to play in the NHL or the WHA, or I don't even think he knew what the WHA was. But Grand Falls was, at the time, Abitibi Price was a big company and had a paper mill there.
Yeah.
And brought in, and so they ran the town basically, and they brought in Joe Byrne, an ex-NHLer, accomplished NHLer, to run minor hockey. It's now the Joe Byrne Arena. And Grand Falls has a history of hockey going right well. They won the Allen Cup. We mentioned the Allen Cup earlier, just 4 or 5 years ago. And they were big, my dad went to all the games growing up. So when Joe Byrne came in, my dad's small town of Grand Falls, Windsor, ended up, they were winning. Joe started being their coach. 5 guys off his Bantam team, a small little thing, went pro. Terry French, Jim Munch, Tony White scored 30 in the late 70s for Washington Capitals. Danny House, Terry French, my dad, Jim Munch, and Tony. So my dad, but his goal was to get a degree. No one in his family had ever done that. A lot of fishermen on one side, a lot of laborers and people that, I'm not saying that they weren't into sports or they weren't smart. It just wasn't part of the culture as much at the time in Newfoundland, especially. My dad's born in 52. Newfoundland only joined Confederation in 49. His family on the Ryans are all from St. Joseph's, a fishing town. Everything was fishing. You go to church on Sunday, you fish, you go to the Legion and have your beers. Very simple life. Yeah. And so he went to Hamilton, and kind of, like he said, he was deer in the headlights, but he knew that they were going to pay for his school, or he could, get it through that. and he finished it. So he went through, had a very successful career, went 44th overall, I think, into both leagues. But then he ended up signing in the WHA. Honestly, his coach from Hamilton was Harry Neal, and Harry went to be assistant coach. That's what happened. And Harry went to be the assistant coach in Minnesota. And Dad went there. It's funny, he only played 1 year in the WHA, and he set the record for shorthanded goals, and it stood for like 5-6 years. He had 6. He didn't play much. He knew going there. I mean, it was first year pro, so I guess he didn't expect too much. But he put that full year in. He's really proud of it. But finished his schooling and came home and started being a teacher and was lured back a couple of times. But his goal was to be a teacher and have his degree. And, for many, many reasons, the biggest one being that he grew up poor, and it was a sense of accomplishment to him, more of an accomplishment to have his degree, I guess, and than to actually keep playing pro. But he had some good years. In his final year, I think in Kalamazoo, he had 100-odd points, and he didn't get up, and he just said, okay, I'm done. So he came back. Point being, he never took himself out of the game. You asked me how I started. He started coaching a junior team here, the Mount Pearl Blades, and he did it to the best of his ability. He played a little bit of senior hockey, always big here. So I grew up, and he was either coaching or playing, so I had free ice time all the time. And not only did he coach, 1 year they went undefeated and won the Atlantic Junior B Championship, which was big for a small town like Mount Pearl. And, the players on his teams ended up being my heroes. And I was just on the ice, my friends and I, every day. And we had all that because he would schedule his practices for minor hockey would happen, and then his practice would be at 9 or 10, or that he would be last. So then whenever his practice was over, if my buddies were as welcome as well, Gary Clark, Jeremy Charles, go down the list, and we would have free ice time. If the parents didn't mind, then Dad would say, hey, I'll stay here with you till 2 a.m. if you want. So it was a lot of free ice time. It was a lot of influences, and senior hockey in Newfoundland is real big. So players, Bill Riley played here right after an NHL. Bill McDougall, Mario Roberge, Robbie Sidney Crosby's uncle Robbie Forbes, one of the best players to come through. But each team had 4 or 5 imports. Some of
Aaron Asham.
Aaron Asham came a few years ago. It goes on to this day. Ash and I played in Gander. We played junior together, and I asked him to come over. And it's a market here, right? They pay for it, especially in the smaller communities that are fairly isolated, because they like to see a good product. And that's why we always have a chance at the Allen Cup. Growing up, in minor hockey, our population maybe holds us back a little bit. But when it gets to senior and people can go wherever they want, you're going to fly them in and pay them. Why not? So we've always had. So I grew up like a big, big fan. And then with all that ice time, to be honest, I went to the Quebec Pee Wee tournament 1 year. And and it wasn't just me, it was all my buddies. We won everything. We won baseball, soccer, hockey, provincials every year. It was just one of those. I just got to be a bit of luck involved, right? I happened to be with a group that were really into sports. And that's it. I went to the Quebec Pee Wee tournament and scored like a hat trick every game and really blew the roof off it. And to be honest, I'm not trying to pump my tires, but that's what happened. And Tri-City Americans were there. And I didn't know anything about the Western League, but that's where my dad's knowledge of it came in. And it was an era. He said, I was a bit feisty. I was big for my age. And he said, I get called up to Bantam and I do all right. But it was weird because I'd never played with hitting before. Tri-City had me move out west, and they said they'd draft me, but I didn't know I'd be playing junior. So my 2 Bantam years, I played junior for the Cornell Millionaires. It was quite, of all the eye-openers ever, that was the biggest for sure.
Well, I was going to ask you, Terry, you fast-tracked to Tier 2 junior, playing at 14. You won scoring title, made the All-Star team. So it was around this time you started to realize you were separating yourself from kids your own age and that your game had another level?
Yeah, it was bittersweet. I remember distinctly when I went to Cornell. And at home, it's not like players in Quebec or Ontario, the population is so big and you can just drive somewhere to a center that plays. I think you take for granted what it's like to leave home as a Newfoundlander. At some point, Alex Newhook just won the Cup with the Colorado Avalanche, but he left at 14 or 15 as well. Mm-hmm. If you're a blue chip, you got to leave early. There's just really no way around it. In my case, real early, because there was no scouting even here. Now at least with the globalization of the internet and, the Q and everything else. But anyway, for me to navigate around being a kid and then being this blue chipper was real tough. And when I got to the Quebec tournament, and as soon as I went out west and played a game junior, TSN came out, Jim Van Hornen did a story. It was called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and not everybody saw it as good. My dad knew I could handle it, right? But there's a way. I'm playing junior at 14. Now there's going to be parties with beer at them. There's going to be girls that want to bang now, right? There's going to be guys smoking dope. There's a whole new world that you're going to have to navigate around. Before that, honestly, I was worried about undoing a bra, maybe, having 2 beer at a party and thinking I was some kind of rebel. That was my idea of being a rebel, was, a little bit outside the edges. But I was a hockey player and, and a student, to be honest. I was always a good student. So they were a bit worried about that. And I went out, but I guess, not everybody can, but my dad judged it. And I remember he went to every player on the team at the beginning, at least the leaders, when I first went there. I had to try out, but I ended up leading the team in scoring. So I knew 2 games into the tryout I was going to make it. And I remember the first thing I thought, because they were like, do you want to play midget too and affiliate? And I'm like, do I have to wear a visor in midget? They're like, yeah. I said, fuck that. I loved the freedom of being 14 and having the visor on. I loved it. And to be honest, it was shit or get off the pot. And when you asked, I'm talking 2 things, and I'm sorry I talk a lot, but as far as because now all of a sudden I got out there and it wasn't the same. I didn't have my buddies I grew up with. No one, I didn't have that bubble, that comfort of no. To that point in Mount Pearl, you're on a roller coaster ride. Anybody is growing up, but they're all doing it at your timing and on your level. Now I'm out there, and the people I'm hanging out with, even if they're just in my grade, I skipped a grade, are a year older, and I'm really hanging out with the hockey. So the youngest guys on the team at that year were 17, so they were 3 years older than me.
Mm-hmm.
So that was hard because everything was different. It was high school, and everybody drove. It was just all of a sudden I was an adult. It was a really weird feeling. And it took a while to get, but I would still come home in the summer and then be like, I don't know, throwing eggs at houses, grade 9, right? So grade 8 and 9. So it was a weird kind of dichotomy that I lived in, the worlds that I bounced in between. But I remember, what am I going to do? And it's got really rough in the first game. Really rough, and a player on the other team cross-checked me in the face, and we had a fight. I got absolutely shit kicked. I didn't know what to do. I'd never thrown a hit before, other than the call-ups to the odd Bantam game, let alone fought. So, it was the second game. I knew when he kicked the shit out of me the first game, I said, "Fuck this," and I went back and basically called him off the bench, and I beat him up. And you know how I did it? I had hot sauce on my hands, man. I put hot sauce all over my hands right before the game. None of the players knew it. They were all going to stick up for me. But junior A, even then, you fought, you got kicked out. You could keep. There was no limit on the year, but if you fought, you got kicked out. So they were waiting for the third. So I said, fuck it, I'll go after him in the second period. And I wiped hot sauce in his face, kicked the shit out of him, and lost my virginity after the game. 10 birds with 1 stone. And I scored a goal that night too, yeah.
The Terry Ryan hat trick.
Yeah, fight, goal, bang. I grew up a lot. That day, if there's one, not everybody has one day, but I have about a 10-hour period that I grew up a lot, like months and months, maybe even years. That night, man, because the first game was a game, and I still might have gotten cut. They're like, wait, because I got thrown out. The guy cross-checked me, but we fought right after that. So it was the first period. So I didn't really play yet. But that second game, I remember first period tipping one upstairs, and the place would be sold out, right? Because I was so young. So people would, I thought they were there to see the team. They were, but a lot of people were there to see me. I mean, who's this fucking guy from Newfoundland think he is, right? I remember scoring one, feeling part of it. And then when I won that fight and especially got laid after the game, I remember the next day coming into the room going, I'm never going home again. I'm a Quesnel millionaire now. I'm a junior player, right? Everything changed overnight.
Now, Terry, how did you end up in Seattle as opposed to maybe the OHL or the Quebec League?
Because, well, that was it, right? The Quebec League at the time, again, it's completely changed, but it wasn't it was the lesser of the 3 leagues for sure. They hadn't won the Memorial Cup in over 20 years, right? I think Cornwall maybe was OHL, but they went over to the Q for Cornwall won it in 1980-81, and then Lafleur and those guys in the early 70s. But the Q wasn't winning it at all in the 80s, at all. So, and the teams that were always like that, ironically, what ended up happening when I went to the West, 3 of the 4 years that I played in the league, Kamloops in my division not only won the league, they won the Memorial Cup. 3 years of 3 out of 5 years. And they were in my division, which helped. We didn't win, but it helped scouts, man, because they were all over us, right? I mean, Jerome McGinley was on my a teammate on Under 18 Canada. We played against each other 24 times a year. Stuff like that. Shane Doan, Darcy Tucker, Jason Strudwick, Brad Lukowicz. They're all on just one team in my division. Then you get Sheldon Surrey, Zdeno Chara, Eric Brewer, all on Prince George. Like we were at, so, I remember the thought going out there was a lot of these prospects, and it was the age of the power forward. My first NHL game ended up being against Eric Lindros, the Legion of Doom, right? These big Scott Stevens, right? Sheldon Surrey, my teammate, ended up going to Jersey, right? No fluke. They had Danico Stevens. The era was favored bigger players and ones that liked long bus rides and grew beards in junior kind of thing, right? Like, so as I learned more and more about junior, I knew where I belonged, and it was out west. But from that tournament in Quebec, there was a lot of scouts there. I nearly went to Cambridge to play with the Winterhawks, but I knew that the draft out west is earlier than everywhere else. It's when you're 14. So I figured in my head, once I knew what was going on, I can go out there, and if Tri-City don't pick me or I get picked to a team I don't want to go to, I can just come home, right? And then I'll go either to the OHL, would have been second. My buddy Danny Clary ended up going there. As soon as I went out west, Mike Barnett called me, and it was like my first week, and he was Wayne Gretzky's agent. So then I knew, and he told me, he said, you'll be the youngest I ever signed. I just signed Radek Bonk. He's a year older than you. And he said, I'll sign you now. But and the first thing my dad said was, if you think Terry's good, you got to go see this kid, Daniel Clary, play. And Clary ended up with a Stanley Cup with Detroit.
Well,
but that's what happened. And, I went to a Vancouver Super Series before all this, after Quebec, because you asked me the link that glues it all together. Tri-City came to me in Quebec, and they wanted me to go out and play with an all-star team from Vancouver in a minor hockey tournament called the Vancouver Super Series, which showcased all the best in the West, USA included. And my dad said, because he was going to, I had to run it by him, and he was like, I think we should take a team, because there wasn't a lot of players scouted there at the time. John Slaney was from Newfoundland, scored the big goal from Canada for Canada in the juniors in 91, but he went 8th or 9th overall. So we're like, Slaney was good around here, but there was all kinds of players that were like almost there. So if Slaney is the best junior in Canada and he's 9th overall, there must be better players here, right? If he came from Newfoundland and he didn't dominate, I mean, he was real good, but so that's what happened. So my dad took a team. And it's funny. We went out to that tournament. We tied 6-6. And usually I've played national championships with Newfoundland in soccer, ball hockey, baseball, and ice hockey. And most of the time, we play the host the first game, so the host can win 8-1. Everybody gets a free hot dog, and the place goes home with those Newfoundlanders. Newfoundlanders try hard, right? But Vancouver thought that was going to happen, but no one had ever seen us or rated us. They knew everybody else. We went out there and fucking tied them 6-6 on a goal off my back, about 10 seconds left, right in front of the net. And immediately, right after the game, scouts were into the room. I remember not knowing. They're like, where did these fucking guys come from? They'd never seen them, right? And we went through. We didn't win a game, but we didn't get blown out. We tied 3 games. We lost 6-5 to Northern Alberta. Shane Doan, Chris Dingman, Vern Beardy. And the last game, we brawled Manitoba. We got killed that one. Brawled them. Didn't give a fuck. Exactly. Newfoundlanders with their lunch pail. 10 guys ended up going. 10 guys went either school, junior. Kurt Walsh went in the 3rd round of the Buffalo Sabres. I went 8th overall. 2 guys went straight to Notre Dame. It was unbelievably successful. Then the next year, Danny Clary took my dad's advice and went to Belleville, and the rest is history. Then came Ryan Clough and Michael Ryder and Adam Party and Luke Adam, and the floodgates were open then. So I know that everything that
Terry,
we did, I think was for a reason, right? Like the way it worked out is that a lot of people benefited from my dad's decision.
The funny thing when you mention that, Terry, is that, like, I mean, obviously a small island like Newfoundland and Prince Edward Island, but if you look at the players per capita that played in the National Hockey League, it's pretty damn high.
Yeah.
Really is. PEI as well. See, it's sneaky. People don't realize that I name those names, and people go, oh, yeah, I guess. I'm like, yeah, now think about it, right? Like, it's easy to talk Toronto and all that area, and even Edmonton, and I got a huge respect for those places that are the hockey meccas of the world and certain parts of Europe, but for per capita, right, our Atlantic provinces do pretty fucking well.
Yeah.
So Terry, I just want to go back to so you're playing Tier 2. The draft, the Bantam draft comes up. You get taken by Tri-Cities. For the listeners, by the way, he was taken 3rd overall. Mike McBain and Wade Redden were taken in front of him, so a couple pretty good players there.
Yeah.
So you're on your way. You win Rookie of the Year, Most Improved Player the following year, 110-point season, including 50 goals, 102 penalty minutes, which I don't suspect were or a couple hundred penalty minutes, pardon me. I suspect they weren't 100 tripping calls. So the question we asked most players coming on, you talked about your first fight with the hot sauce. Did you make a conscious decision to cross over to all of a sudden you have to be way more physical and fighting was going to be a part of your game? Because as you know, Terry, once you cross that line, there's no going back.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's a good point. Part of it, there's a lot to unpack with me mentally when it comes to fighting, because even in Quesnel, those early years, I don't remember. I think one year one of those years I had over 200 minutes. I remember, and it was just me being a fucking at the end of the game, like say what you want. I didn't like being told to fight. It happened a little bit later. We'll get to that with Michelle Therrien and everything, but there was always something in me, the schoolyard Newfoundlander, that there was a reason, right? Someone would spray the goalie or someone would. And I always felt a little bit like it was a slap in my face a little bit, even though if we had 3 tough guys on the bench, I would always find. And then I went to the Western League and I realized it's something in the toolbox that not everybody had. And I don't mean that I was a great fighter. I became a decent fighter because of how much I did it, but I really didn't care about eating a few. I didn't care. And I noticed that because of that, I could fight players that were much bigger than me, and all I had to do was stand in there, and there would be a win. I just had Andrew Shaw on my podcast earlier. It'll be out tomorrow. And, there's something there, same thing. And he told me a story about his first camp, and you can't make yourself go score. Some people can almost get there if they're super duper stars. But for me, it would put me at ease a little bit because I felt a bit of pressure to score. I was always that big prospect that was supposed to do it, and for the most part did. But if I was ever like having a mediocre game or even a bad, I'd run a guy. And back then I really honestly didn't cheap shot a lot. I didn't run goalies, but there was enough of a reason. There was always a tough guy going around. And I remember little thing, like I remember fought Wade Belak and it was a real good fight and it was at home and it was just kind of I just remember that having an impact. And I didn't really beat him, but you know what I mean? He's Wade Belak. So if I can just sit in there and do all right, it's a bit of a win. It's all about momentum. Do you really want to get into a hockey fight and break the guy's orbital bone? Not really. It's all about momentum for the team and for you and for the fans. And if you can combine that, and I knew I could. I always knew, like Aaron Asham you mentioned. I always loved Ash for that. He could go out and give the fans their money's worth in a fight. He might not win every one, but he ain't going down early. And if you leave him on the ice, he might score. He's pretty good, right? So it over time, I realized that given that I was pretty good at it, and I wasn't great at winning, but I knew how not to lose, right? And there's something to that.
Did anybody ever talk to you about that when you went there? Or because I remember when I went to the WHA, John Brophy was our coach.
Yeah, I bet.
A legendary Antigonish gentleman, and he made it pretty clear to me that, hey kid, if you're not going to stand up for yourself, they're going to run you out of the goddamn league.
Yeah.
And so my first year in Birmingham at 19 years old, I had 248 penalty minutes and 26 goals and 50 some points, but I knew I had to stick up for myself.
That's the most impressive stat that stands out to me by yourself. By the way, a lot of people don't realize you had that many penalty minutes. I was actually jarred when I saw it. We were driving through Newfoundland, and I knew you. I'm not saying that I didn't know you could pick up for yourself, but that's bordering on goon territory. That's crazy. To put up almost 30 with that, that's respect. Yeah, man. And I know how that goes. And you know what's funny? Side note, in the Western League, when I played in the West, to curb fighting, can't remember the name of the president of the league, maybe Ed Chenoweth, maybe at the time, but they didn't allow 10-minute misconduct. So my 207 minutes in my draft year doesn't count tens. And how many line brawls and everything would be that would have been 300 and something. I remember even I remember being at the draft going, what the fuck? That's not fair. Like, like guys from the Quebec League that are getting 200 minutes are a lot different than the guys in the Western League that are getting 200 minutes. Literally, no 10-minute in any case was counted, only 2s and 5s.
Really?
And if you can believe it,
Wow.
when I first got drafted, I'm 14 years old, and they would bring me down to see the odd game. And this guy, Kerry Toporowski. So at the beginning of the year, they would take everybody in and tell us, and I didn't warm up with the other team either. It changed. But during my time in the WHL, we weren't allowed, because there was so many brawls before the game, to warm up with the other team. So if we went into Seattle, for example, we'd warm up at 6 o'clock with a 7 o'clock game. Then we'd get off at 6:20. We'd all ride the bike or whatever. Then they'd go on and have their full ice warm up, full ice power play, 3-on-2 both ways. And then, craziness. And then they'd come on and you'd go out and play the game. It was the same sort of thing. So Kerry Toporowski had 515 minutes. He broke the record anyway, with no 10s counted. He broke the record anyway. So you had to navigate, man. You just had to. There was no way I saw it as getting out of this with that. And I didn't want to be scared all the time. I wanted room. It's room in the, I got 50 goals in my draft year. They weren't, many of them weren't coming in. I didn't have an overpowering shot. I think it was accurate. I mean, I did get there by being a prospect that could score. I'm not taking that away, but I'm saying a lot of my goals in the WHA come from going in front of the net and just having that extra second of respect that the other person didn't, and getting my stick on that puck, whereas someone else might not. You know what I mean, Rick, right? That's a lot of them. I mean, I know you've got a wicked shot. You still got a great shot. But if you didn't have that net front presence, there's no way you would have scored as many goals. And I'm not shitting you.
Right.
The last goal you scored for us in Springdale was old school Rick Vive, right up under the bar. You got it in the slot. Once in a while, you find yourself like right in that sunshine, that halo that's looking down, and you just found yourself wide open in the slot and did what everybody in the building wanted you to do.
Now, Terry, you mentioned your draft year. What kind of talk were you hearing about who may take you, who may not take you, where you go? And secondly, the second part of that question, your father, how big of an influence? I mean, the obvious part, he would be an influence, but how big of an influence would he be on that in guiding you that year, especially after having gone through it himself?
Yeah, he was there. If I ever asked a question, he didn't really sway me, or like he wasn't an Eric Lindros, kind of good or bad. I love Eric Lindros. I'm saying his dad was a big part of his decisions, because he might even have been his agent. I had Mike Barnett again, which was Gretzky's agent. So Dad respected that. He came out and visited a lot. And there are little things like, that Mike didn't know. Like if you're in a dressing room, like picking up the pucks after practice, like always be the last off the ice. And you'll get addicted to that. Like, and there are a lot of things
that's
that he
what
said.
I meant, stuff like that.
Yeah, that's fantastic that he was there for those things. Show the veterans respect, because there's a few times in the hockey hierarchy early on the bus, I wanted to spit in their face. Are you fucking kidding me? I'm not you pick him up, you fucker. But you do that, right? There's just a rite of passage that you got to go through what everybody else does. So for those little things, I'm glad that I had him. But in my draft, here's a great way to explain it. We being me and my father and my friends, we were only used to me being a very, very big like I said, 3rd overall in the draft. And to be honest, it nearly went first. I ended up going to Red Deer anyway, but they called and I didn't want to go there. I said, there's no way I'm going. I'm out here to go to Tri-Cities. So I was a big point being, I was used to being a big prospect who had a lot of expectations, that could score. Yep. And that was the number one thing. It was nice that I could fight and everything, but it was scoring. And I got to Tri-Cities, and my first year, looking back, I think it felt like a bit of a disappointment, but I had 33 points. I played 61 games, I think, so I missed 12 or 13. I played 61 games. I think I had 33 points and 176 penalty minutes, again, without 10. So I thought that's a pretty good year, and next year, maybe I can turn this into a point a game. I know my name was being thrown out. I was on a prospect card collection. So I don't really know, but I know I wasn't rated in the first round yet. Might have been knocking on the door. I think someone would have said, he's safely going to go in the 4th round, maybe. But I went back the second year. Now, first year, like I said, we had a team. It also benefited me. We had a team that didn't make the playoffs, or I think we made it on the last day. We didn't have a good team. So I played a lot at 16, but third line, the odd power play, not many, penalty kill every time. So then I'm 17. Now, this guy came out of nowhere, Daymond Langkow. So I come in with all these expectations. Lanks is a year older than me hockey-wise, but got a late birthday. So we were both going in the draft now. We're both going into our draft year. He's played 2 years. I played 1. And Lanks was unbelievably quick and agile. So I knew it. Without saying it, I was a bit stubborn, and my coach knew it. And I know my father knew it. Not that he would ever point me, but, in a direction. But I remember Bob Laux was my coach, and he called me in, and he just said, look, you're not as good of a skater as Daymond. So you can be the second-line centerman here, but I think you can play wing. I think Daymond's a bit feisty. You're a better fighter than he is. You're a little bit bigger. You're a great passer. You can set him up. He's the better scorer of you two, and he was. Like, I had 50 that year. Not a lot of people did. Lanks ended up with 67.
Oh,
right? There's
boy.
only 5 or 6 in the league, so he was telling the truth, though. I didn't want to hear it all, but I'm like, so you're asking me to be a left winger with a guy who's a better scorer and skater than I am, and, it took a little bit of pride, but, swallowing my pride, but looking back, it was such a selfish thought because we complemented each other really well. I ended up going left wing with Daymond. And the year before, I think he had, 70 points. He was 17. Like I said, I had 33. Well, he goes up to 140, leads the league in scoring. I go from 16 goals to 50. And we both it was a unique combo because we could both fight as well. So our coach had to harness us in a little bit from that, right? So it really worked out. And we lost in that year in 6 games to Kamloops, who ended up winning the Memorial Cup, and they won 9-1 against Brian Berard and the Plymouth, I think it was, or Detroit Junior Red Wings. And so, and they just went through it like a knife through butter through the playoffs, other than against us and against Brandon. And looking back, we had a young team, and I believe Daymond and I tied for the league lead in the playoffs with Tucker, and we didn't even make the final. So personally, it was an obvious success, but it really did feel like a team success. You guys have seen and probably played on teams that you don't win the championship, but it does feel like a bit of a team success. Like, we won 2 rounds to get there. A lot of us were in our draft year. A lot of us just made the team and wanted to stay in Major Junior. If all of us leave and we've all accomplished something, and the team we lost to was the best in the nation, it really did. It felt like a successful year as a team.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny you mentioned the warm-up situation, because I remember I went to the Memorial Cup my first year in Sherbrooke. New West was there. Ottawa was there. So the first game we played New West.
New West ended up being Tri-Cities. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, they're literally skating in to our blue line.
Yeah.
And we're like sitting, skating around going, what the hell? And then Mike Breen, who was from Boston, who was a pretty tough guy who played with us, he went up to one of the guys and said, if you guys don't get out of our zone, I'm going to bite your goddamn nose off. and they did. They backed off. And,
all intimidation tactics.
Oh, yeah. And now we didn't win any games, but it was a great experience to play in the Memorial Cup. And it was in Vancouver. So yeah, that was pretty good. But New West were so big and strong and tough.
Well, and given that time, right? It wasn't that much later. Like, it was, that I came into the mix, and everything I was looking at was coming from the 80s. And, I guess my first year Major Junior was 93, 94, technically. I played games in 92, 93, and in 91, 92, I'm in Quesnel. So I guess looking back, why did I go out west? Like, I was just drawing from that. Like, it seemed to be the junior league that was most in sync with the NHL at the time. Mm-hmm. It went back the other way. I would never say it now. At times, the West looks like dinosaurs. And, the Q, Crosby came. It really expanded. All these Atlantic cities that had AHL teams now got Q teams, really embraced it. A lot of great places for players to play junior. I endorse it all. It's fucking great if you can just play Major Junior. But at the time, for me, it was Western League.
Now, Terry, this is a point for the draft where Squid and I, we do this with every player, and it's where you look for the interview. The interview is always a big part of the process, even more today than it was maybe back in Squid's day. But, we've had some.
We didn't have interviews, Mike.
Yeah, and we've had some pretty decent stories. I'll just share one we've shared with the listeners before, but we want to pass this one along to Terry. Ethan Morrow was kind of probably at the top when he was called in by the Boston Bruins. And they got all the scouts around the room, and Harry Sinnott looked across the desk at him and said, if you're play for the Boston Bruins, what number do you want to wear? And he said it pretty harshly. And without missing a beat, Ethan Morrow said 4 or 8.
Oh, yeah, really?
And Harry Sinnott says,
that's great. What an answer.
Get the fuck out of my room right now. And all the guys are trying not to laugh. Well, you've got a Mike Milbury story, I think, that tops that.
Okay. And by the way, I'm sorry, earlier I ignored, because your original question was, did I have any inkling I was going to Montreal? So the answer was actually no. So getting into this is my final interview. I'll tell you this story, okay?
Yeah.
Technically my final 2. And I was interviewed, I think there was 26 teams in the league. I don't think there was 32 then. And I was interviewed by almost every team. The only 2 teams, I believe, I could be off by 1 or 2, but I think it was Detroit and Montreal that didn't interview me at all. In fact, on the way to the draft, in the elevator on the draft day, going to my seat, Doug Robinson was Montreal's head scout, and Pierre Mondu were in there, and we were in the elevator. And Doug looked over at me and he said, you know, a lot of goals, a lot of penalty minutes, played real hard, and really gave me my props. And I was very encouraged. And I was like, wow, the Habs like me. And then he said, Great Memorial Cup. Great Memorial Cup. I'm going, Great Memorial Cup. And my dad looks at me and goes, he thinks you're Shane Doan. Oh, okay. And I just went with it. I go, yeah, thanks a lot. 15 minutes later, they draft me, right? It's wild. But anyway, so the day before this, so my agent calls, and for those that don't know, there's, a vetting process. All these teams, some of them, I mean, Washington and Dallas actually flew me down after the season and before the draft. The draft, it was a lockout year, was July 8th that year. So I don't remember, but it was April, May, June, they flew me down. So I knew that there were some teams that were real interested.
Yeah.
And I remember in Tri-City, some teams flew out. Some of them had paperwork. I remember Washington, they did have a pretty big interview process with Jack Button, who was alive at the time, Craig Button's father, and more, but I just remember him being there. He was an old guy and really knew a lot about hockey. So they took me through a process, but there was also it was almost like an IQ test. Like if a train leaves from point A at this time and point B, it was like SAT kind of thing. So there was a few teams that did that, and some were just an interview over the phone. I remember New Jersey was our draft was in Edmonton. So when I got to the draft, probably half of them were at the draft. I got there, I went to their room. They literally wanted me to take my clothes off, not like naked. It wasn't a sexual thing. It sounds like, but it was go in, take your clothes off, take a picture of me, and then ask me what other sports I was into as I was putting on my clothes. And then I said, okay, get out. I was like, and they ended up taking Peter Sikora, who was 6 foot 130. So I don't know what the picture was of the physique had anything to do with whatever. I mean, he's a great player, but it was just weird. Anyway, and the other team said, you Ride, do the VO2 test again, even though we'd already done it. It was just a weird kind of format. It was like the Wild West. I think now there's more of an organization to it. But anyway, my agent was Mike Barnett. And like I said, it was in Edmonton. And Daymond Langkow, who was my line mate I spoke of, he ended up going 5th overall. I went 8th. Brian Boucher, there he is, our goalie, went 22nd. So we were all rated in the first round. We were all represented by IMG. And we were all there together. Now, combine that with half of my team being from Tri-City. Sheldon Surrey is one of my best friends. He was drafted the year before from Edmonton. Brant Myers was there. He was his good buddy, and I knew Brant. It was a celebration of the Western League. So, and I do have relatives that live out west. So it was a very, 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 very busy time. So when Mike called us and asked us, and he said, Daymond and Terry, will you do these last 2 interviews? So Lanks was he's actually from Vegreville, and he was already halfway out there. And he's like, no, man, I've done them all, Mike. I don't want to turn around. I think if he had to, he would have. I'm not saying he had a bad attitude, but Lanks just wasn't into it. And I was staying right there at the Crown Plaza. And I remember I'd already left the hotel, but I was like, okay. So I got out wherever we went, Senior Frogs or Cowboys, wherever. And I took a cab back and walked in. So the funny thing is I'd had a couple of beers before this. So I had a bit of, and, I didn't say anything. I don't think they cared. It was a different time. And I guess we were 18. You could be 18 and drink in Alberta. You still can't. So, but anyway, it was the end of a long road. So I went back. Okay, it was a favorite of Mike Barnett more than anything, and I didn't want to be that prospect. I'm like, the day that I turned down an interview with an NHL team is a fucking day I should fucking take the skates off. Of course I'm going to go back. So I walked in, and I'm in the New York Islanders room. So it's like, it's a business kind of boardroom kind of table, like a big oval. There's probably 5 seats on each side, and then a head at one side and a head at the other. So there's no one at either head. So I sit on the far head of the table. Where else am I going to sit? Right? So these guys and it's an adjoining room. It appears to me there's nobody in the other room, whatever. So we're talking, and these scouts are on the side and lining the sides of the table. It's full. They're looking at me. They're really pumping my tires. In fact, I'm like, this isn't an interview at all. They're just telling me how good I am, right? It was like, well, you can really fight, and what's your favorite pass that I have one before a game, because you seem to have a lot of energy. Like every single question is almost bent into my favor. So much it's starting to feel almost uncomfortable. Like something's going to happen here. Something's got to give. So then I hear the footsteps coming from the adjoining room, right? And Mike Milbury walks in. Of course, I'm not thinking about it. I don't even know that I thought about it on the way in that he's the GM. But there's just a lot going on. So I sat down, I'm sat down. So he comes in, walks around the table, sits down, tells me, he says, well, I think you're faster with the puck than without it. I thought that might have been another compliment. It turns out it wasn't. So then he stands up again after saying it. He walks around the table, and then he nearly sits down, but he's looking at me. And every time he gets back to the head of the table, he's looking at me in the eyes. And this time he's like almost kneeling on his chair, and he looks over and he said, well, I think you got lucky against Wade Belak. I think and by the way, I didn't win that fight. So if he's saying I got lucky, it means that 9 out of 10, you'd get your face broken in. I don't know what, but I mean, it was just a fairly good fight, right? It was a long one, but I certainly didn't win it. So I'm starting to go, Jesus, okay. But I did do all right, and here we are now, which brings me to this moment. I guess we can speculate. I'm thinking in my head all day if we want. And then he says, well, it's a good thing Daymond Langkow played with you this year. And I said, well, with all due respect, Mr. Milbury, I think it's a good thing he played with me. He went from 75 points to 140. I mean, come on. You don't think I set him up for those? I mean, last year he had 26 goals. He had 67 this year. I assisted on 41 of them. Is that good? So without, but I do say that, but not in a sarcastic way. But I did say that. I said, I think he benefited from playing with me. And then he said something else, and I said, with all due respect, Mr. Milbury, you're picking number 1 where I know I'm not going. And you're picking number 28 where I sure as fuck know I'm not going. I'm going to fall somewhere comfortably in the middle. Now, keep in mind, I had a few beers in me. I'm going to fall somewhere comfortably in the middle. Unless things get way out of hand, I'm just looking at it. Not unless I get arrested tonight. And I'm looking at the hockey news. I'm rated number 12. I'm having great meetings with everybody. I know what's happening. I'm not going number 28. I sure as fuck I'm not going number 1. So, why am I even here? He goes, okay, tough guy, which was true, too. I remember thinking that in the cab. Why am I even going to the Islanders meeting?
Yeah.
So, he says, okay, tough guy. He looks at me. He gives me a hypothetical. He says, you're in Tri-Cities. You and Langkow, is it? He goes, you hoodlums. Calls us hoodlums. He says, you're out one night with a couple of girls. I think he called them broads too. Just the weirdest interview with a GM. And he says, okay, and you've been hot tubbing and, things are going great. Lanks leaves with his girl at 10:30. But he said, now the girl you're with, it's 10 to 11. It's a 10-minute drive home. Your curfew's at 11, but she's on the couch. She spreads her legs and says, fuck me, Terry. What do you do? And now I've been calling him Mr. Milbury right up to that point. I took my water and I went, well, Mike, I fuck her for 5 minutes and then I speed home. And I swear to you, half the table I could tell started laughing, like one guy really out loud, and a lot of them just put their head the other way, and he just said, go on, or get out. He goes, our interview's done. Now, the funny thing is, when I got up and walked towards the doorway, I didn't realize in the doorway, Phil Esposito was standing there, which was weird because he was the GM of Tampa Bay, but he'd played with Milbury on the Bruins, I think. So I guess they must have known each other anyway. But I just found it weird. But when I was walking towards the door, so Esposito starts laughing, and he said, "What did you say again?" And I told him on the way over, because he had a room like maybe 50 feet down the same hall. So we leave the Islanders room. We're walking. I'm with him and his brother Tony, who are going to do my interview now, my last one technically with Tampa Bay. And he laughs, and I tell him what I just told Milbury, and he's fucking howling. And he sits down, and he goes, "Okay, I got one question for you. How far apart did Napoleon sleep from his wife?" And I said, "Phil, a Bonaparte." The only thing I knew about Napoleon was his last name was Bonaparte. That's it. So that's all my head. It sounded like a smart answer, but it's all I knew. I went, "A Bonaparte, Phil." He goes, "You just won yourself a drink and a snack. What do you want?" It was like a bunch of shit there. So I took it. And he goes, "I got to be honest, I'm not going to pick you." He goes, "You're just not quite a good enough skater, and we're picking fifth." But he goes, "I love your buddy Langkow. What kind of a guy is he?" And I said, "Well, he's a great guy. You know, I trust him." He goes, "What kind of a fucking guy is he? Would would he rat on you? You bang someone's girlfriend? Would you talk? Like, what happens? You're on the bus and you've had a beer. Would he tell the coach like that?" And I go, "Okay." I said, "No, man, I trust him with anything." He said, "Fucking rights." He goes, "What, do you have any questions for me?" And I asked him about the 72 Canada Cup for an hour, and he answered all of it. And I'm kidding. Yeah, we had a great time. I was like, thank God I came back to these meetings.
So now, Terry, when the call finally came and it was Montreal. Now, being a Down Easterner, you must have been a bit of a Habs fan, so I would gather that was probably your team. So, what was the first thing that went through your mind when your name got called by those guys? You kind of maybe had no inkling, so it must have been
no inkling, none. And that was 8, and number 9 was Boston. I thought I was going to Boston because I had great meetings with them, and I remember after it happened, I remember them saying to me, whoever they picked, they were going to give a chance that year to kind of get their feet wet. It ended up being Kyle McLaren. And they said they loved the name, the Irish name. And again, I don't want to compare myself because it's two different things, but Cam Neely was one of my favorite players. And they figured that if I just brought that style with the name Ryan, they said, you know, it's a good place for me to land. So I thought that I was going to Boston. And then my meetings with Dallas went incredible. So I knew I wasn't going any later than 11. I knew that. But I figured 9 or 11. Like, I wasn't even really paying attention. But we saw the cameras started coming down to me, right? Like, you know, the cameras on like the pulleys that are coming from the sea. Like, so they went over to the Canadiens table and then they came right over to me. So like within seconds of them calling my name, I kind of knew that they were going to do it. And it was all, I don't know what to say. I know that happens all the time now, but see, my hands are around. It's Andre Boudria and Doug Robinson, who about a half hour before thought I was Shane Doan. But I remember that didn't happen a lot at the time. Now it happened. But I remember I hugged them both, and I was just, for me, it was more of a team journey, I think, than most other people there, because I'm the only Newfoundlander to play in the Western League. I know that my parents got a lot of shit. I mean, you know, not from everybody, but it seemed like an odd move to take me out there and play junior, and I'd come home with black eyes and it was almost like a lot of people thought my dad was like child abuse. Like, you know, I'm 14, right? I'm 14. I'm out there playing and fighting but you know, and they didn't ever make me do it or anything else, but it just felt, and all those, you know, as a young prospect and you're scoring a lot and you're from a small place, a lot of people wanted to see me fail. And, you know, a lot of people wanted to see me succeed. It's the extremes, but it all came through. I remember it was a flood of emotions. I was like, you know, everything has led me to this moment. And, you know, the only NHL jersey I had growing up was Montreal Canadiens with Chris Nyland on the back. Before I even, there it is, that has Nyland on the back. Only, you know, from being, again, I never thought, and when you're looking at that picture, never, ever did I think I was going to play in the NHL. I was just a hockey fan, and it almost seemed unrealistic from Newfoundland. There was nobody in the 80s from Newfoundland played.
Okay, so now, Terry, you're a high selection by an iconic franchise.
Yeah.
You're a fan, so you have some, as you just talked about, so you have some idea looking from the outside what this team is about and what it stands for and what it represents to the people of Quebec and so on. When you arrived and you got enthralled in it, was it as you expected, way above, or anything else?
It was what I expected. Not that it wasn't overwhelming, but it was what I expected. And, you know, a lot of people complain about it. It's funny. I really kind of enjoyed it. I didn't know what it would be like, but I felt, you know how some people need to go to the gym, they need a personal trainer with them?
Yeah.
Or they don't do the work. I'm not saying I always worked hard. It was one of my better attributes, but I liked being held under the gun. I liked having to go to the rink early and being held accountable by Saku Koivu or Vincent Damphus or just the Montreal in general. Like, I wouldn't let myself be a first round pick and show up less than prepared, like it really, and I know the way things worked out, but in the end, there's more to it. I felt really accepted. I really enjoyed being a Montreal Canadien. I was treated very well there. I mean, I ended up having a bit of a falling out with them because of Michel Therrien, really. And that was another lifetime ago. But when I first got there, yeah, they really made me feel great. I remember the guys who drafted me, right, Serge Savard and Jacques Demers, but they got fired like 3 months later after the Patrick Roy incident. But I remember before it. So I went through camp and I played as hard as I possibly could. And that's what I said earlier, like, how having the fighting in the tank, in the toolbox was good, because I remember I wasn't scoring, but, there's no denying a fucking 18-year-old is out there fighting Tie Domi in Maple Leaf Gardens and fighting Donald Brashear. Clearly it's not a balls thing, right? And I just wanted to show them I work hard, and I did that. I hit everything that moved. I ended up getting some dirty goals. And so Demers gave me a couple games, one in the Montreal Forum, and then one against the Leafs. I ended up fighting Domi.
Well, tell that, Terry, stop right there and tell that story about Domi, because you made a promise to your buddies, and I think that's a pretty funny story.
Well, that was it. I never, again, for me, I never really got over the fact that this is the NHL, man. This is wild. And it never felt personal. It was all my buddies and I growing up again, because it just didn't seem like a possibility. It wasn't like I was growing up in Collingwood, Ontario, saying, I would have loved it. I'm not saying I didn't kind of visualize it.
Yeah, I get it.
I just didn't see me playing in the NHL, and it just felt like this journey. And, even in the Western League, I had buddies like back before, they were making money and stuff, like just saving up every dollar to come out and see me play one game in Lethbridge or something. And so I felt like this incredible journey that I was taking. So before that first camp, now the draft's in July this year because of the lockout, or the year I got drafted, July 8th, which was my parents' anniversary. So it was a big deal. So I came home from that and they had a big party for me. Well, we were going to have a party anyway. It was Friday going into last year high school for the boys. And I guess I would have been just done high school. So anyway, and I was really, the topic came up. Leafs, Habs, and half of us were Habs fans, half of us Leafs. And it just came up. My buddy Blair Connolly said, well, I bet you wouldn't fight Tie Domi. I said, definitely. And there was a girl there, Jillian Chipman, who's now married to my good friend Steve Halliday, but I didn't want to let her down. I was hot for Jill. And I was like, well, of course I will. Of course. And of course, another rum and Coke. I'm like 18, of course. Oh, yeah, fuck, definitely. In fact, I'm going to initiate it. Then by the end of the party, I'm like calling my shot on Tie Domi. I just don't think it's going to happen. I'm like, I'm going to go to camp. Best case scenario, I get into like a few inter-squad games and I go back to junior, and everybody forgot about this by the time I'm 21 and I actually play against them. But so anyway, Demers comes to me and he said, I know you're a big hockey historian. And because I was in awe, I remember going to I'd go to practice like 5 hours early, and not because I was a dedicated player, because I wanted to walk through the tunnels and see the alumni room. And I wanted to see where like these great players worked out and won cups and stuff. Right. And I think they picked up on that. So Demers came down and he had a smile. He put his arms around me and he said, look, you can go back and play your home opener. And then there was home opener was Saturday. You can play Friday in Spokane, your home opener with Tri-Cities on Saturday, or you can stay here and you can play tonight in Montreal Forum, and you can play tomorrow night in Maple Leaf Gardens. And not only was that significant because it was the Leafs and the Habs, but it was, at home we were playing Boston. So I'm like, fuck, I get to play the Bruins and the Leafs. But it was in the NHL rinks. It was at the very end of exhibition.
Yeah.
And it also, it was a lot of my buddies, for whatever reason, I can't remember, but were going to be at both games. Part of it because they wanted to come see me play, but there was something going on in Toronto, whatever it would be. So I was like, of course I'm going to say yes. I remember going, of course. But then it immediately dawned on me that I'd be playing against Tie Domi. So I played that night, and I didn't know what to do. My first NHL game was that game at home, and I was so nervous. It's a blur, but I remember Demers just going, just go out and work hard, and I did, and he put me with Turgeon and Recchi, and I remember saying, who fights on the other team? Again, I was never one to initiate it, but I knew that this was a chance to go out and impress. And so there was a guy, Steve Leach, and he was 32 years old. I was 18. He was going for another contract, and Odeline told me, and he goes, just sniff around him, and he's going to go you. And he was skating one way right in front of the bench, and I kind of slashed his ankles. I felt bad about it because, again, I'm not that guy. But he turned around, he was giving me eye contact, and we fought right in front of the bench. Boom, the last punch, I knock him down, and I wasn't even used to that. I'm used to just going, I can't believe it happened. It's out there somewhere on YouTube, and the last punch, actually, you can see I broke my knuckles here, so my last punch, actually, I do this. I was full of adrenaline. He goes down. I'm like, holy shit, and the next shift, I get out of the box. That's when he put me out with Turgeon and Recchi, and I finish my hits, and then Recchi throws it out of the corner, bounces off my body into the net. I can't believe this. I'm like, thank fuck I'm not on a plane back to fucking Spokane right now. Like, I just scored in the Forum, and I won a fight. And after the game, he said, well, you're definitely not going back. You're playing Maple Leaf Gardens tomorrow night. So we got there, and it was great. Odeline and Keene and fucking Mark Recchi all took me out for a bite to eat. They were laughing. They had a great time with it. And then I told them, and I don't think they took me seriously. I remember being on the plane. I don't think anybody with Turner Stevenson, I don't think he believed it. And I got up, and I just knew it that morning. We went for pregame skate. I told everybody, again, I don't think anybody believed me. For anybody that was in the old Maple Leaf Gardens, you'll remember this. Right on the way out of the visitors' dressing room, there was a payphone against the wall right there. Yeah. And I remember, and they were all behind me. They were letting me go first because rookie, and I fought the night before and scored the goal. And I dialed 0 with the mom and dad. I go, mom, put dad on the other phone. They got there. I said, I'm fighting Tie Domi tonight. I remember her going, no, you're not. And then I hung up the phone, and I went out for warm-up. Now, again, in my warm-ups in junior, there are no other teams. So the only games that I've ever warmed up at this point are that game and the game right before it against Boston that the other team's actually on the ice. So I went right out next to the red line. I got down to stretch. I saw other guys were over there kind of doing their veteran chat, and I just went over, and Domi was there. I said, hey, do you want to fight tonight? And he said, who wants to fight me? Is it Stevenson, Rive, Thornton? I go, no, I do. And he goes, I'm not fighting an 18-year-old from Newfoundland full of piss and vinegar. I said, how do you know who I am? He goes, I'm fucking Tie Domi. I do my homework. And I went, and so he said no. And again, this is on YouTube. I'm not making it up. Not that I would, but there's no exaggeration here. I went on. So I thought about it again. Again, I'm not that guy to go out and like headhunt Matthew Schneider or Doug Gilmour. But the whistle went, Schneider was there, and I knew Domi was on the ice. So I kind of hit him in the shoulder just to let him know. I knew, I mean, I could smell it. And Domi pulled me out of the pile and proceeded to shit kick me. But I'll give him credit. The first punch, he knocked me straight down. And then I got up, and guys, I hadn't put much thought into it about how great of a left hand he had, and I'd never thrown lefts. And I remember halfway through, like, looking down, and I remember, like, it flashed through my head, I'm learning to throw my left with Tie Domi at Maple Leaf Gardens on the emblem. Like, this is the weirdest thing, you know, because in junior, you just kind of go. I didn't know what I was doing, but we went pretty good. And I hit him with the first couple of lefts I ever remember hitting anybody with Tie Domi. And then he got me down at the end of it. When we got to the penalty box, he looked over and he said, thanks a lot for fighting me. I said, I thought you didn't want to fight. He goes, look, man, no one wants to fight me at home. And I went, why? And as soon as I said, why does no one want to fight you at home? Like, Gilmour scored, and he said, because we get all the momentum. And he laughed. And then I ended up, I won't say where, but he told me to meet him after the game. I went to this place, and he wasn't there, but there was a little spot. And there was some Grey Goose, and I can't remember what other drinks, but there was some drinks laying there for us, a little velvet rope. And me and my buddies, again, from high school, Blair Connolly, who brought it up in his backyard, me, him, guy Jason Foote, and I think Greg Dunn, buddies from high school. We went over there and we drank Grey Goose on Tie Domi. It was a fucking great memory.
Now, didn't you call the school and announce to the school that you were going to fight because your buddies called you out on it?
I did. I called O'Donnell and I said, I believe it was Mr. Kiley, I think was the principal. I didn't really know him personally, but I phoned, and you know how they do the announcements before school. I said, the game's on TV tonight. and I'm going to do it. I'm fighting Tie Domi. And he laughed. He knew me. I mean, he's from Mount Pearl. I didn't know him that well. I said, put it on the announcements. He goes, what do you mean? I said, I'm not kidding you. I'm going to fight Tie Domi tonight. I swear to you, it's going to happen. At least I'm going to try. I said, okay, Terry. Anyway, threw it on the announcements, and lo and behold, it happened. And you know what's funny, guys? The next year, he spun me around as I was skating back checking, and it was 1-0 for us. Probably a bad time for me to fight Tie Domi, but it was a code. He just spun me around and said, you owe me one. I said, okay. So I fought him again. And then oddly enough, later that game, he hit Koivu down by the net, and I was the only one close to it. I fought him again. So I fought him 3 times. And then I know it's a long story, but I got to tell this part. In 2007, my friends were graduating from St. Mary's, and I went up there, and I believe it was a golf tournament in the summer. Bubbles, I think his name is Mike Smith with Trailer Park Boys. He was having a golf tournament for charity, and Domi was there, and he was in this bar, and I was going to go. My buddies were like, go talk to Tie Domi, and I still think he wouldn't remember me. But anyway, I didn't, and he left, but he sent over a note. I guess it got back to him. Then he's like, of course I'd remember someone I fought 3 times. And then 3 hours later, when we got up to pay the bill, he'd paid it. So, and I've heard mixed stories on Tie Domi, but I know that at the very least, he respected me. I appreciate that. I don't know what our bill was. I really don't remember, but I know he didn't have to pay for it. And, he was a nice guy to me.